Part 1. Before Rosa Parks. There was her. When we talk about the civil rights movement, one name almost always comes first: Rosa Parks, the woman who refused to give up her seat on a bus, a symbol, a legend, the beginning of a revolution. But here's a question. Who came before her? 9 months before Rosa Parks made history, a 15-year-old girl had already done the same thing. But no one clapped for her. No one filmed it. No one reached out to help. Her name was Claudette Colvin. She was just a teenager, a student, heading home from school like any other day. And then, an ordinary bus became the place where history could have changed. The driver yelled at her, "Get up! Give up your seat!" because a white man had stepped on board, and because she was black. But that day, Claudette didn't move. No signs, no chants, no crowd behind her, just her and her belief in justice. They dragged her off that seat, arrested her. The newspapers called her unruly. Community leaders said she was the wrong face for the movement, and history tried to forget her. But before Rosa sat down, Claudette stood up. Pause. Softer, closer to the viewer. Here on this channel, we tell the stories that don't make it into textbooks. The ones that were erased, we bring them back. If truth matters to you, subscribe. Because every story like this matters. Now, let's go back to the America Claudette lived in, where she had to fight, long before the world was ready to hear her. Part 2. America, 1955, a world built on silence. America in 1955 was not the America we know today. It was a country where law and injustice walked hand in hand. If you were born black, you started with fewer rights, fewer chances, fewer paths forward, and far more reasons to be afraid. They called them the Jim Crow laws. But no one in power called them racist. They called them tradition, order. Just the way things are. Whites sat in the front, blacks sat in the back. Whites used one entrance, blacks used another. Even the Bibles used in court were different. And on buses, if a white person needed a seat, you were expected to stand up. Even if you were a teenager, even if you were tired, even if you paid the same fare. And if you didn't stand up, they could throw you off the bus, arrest you. Or worse, people were afraid. Because they knew what the system could do. And in a world like that, being quiet was how you survived. But sometimes, silence breaks. Sometimes, someone stands up, even when everyone else looks down. It was in that world that Claudette Colvin was raised. And it was in that world that she said no. Part 3. Who was Claudette Colvin? Soft, respectful, with curiosity. Before that day on the bus, she was just a girl, but not an ordinary one. Claudette Colvin, born in Alabama, 1939, a place where you learned quickly what your place was, if you were black. She grew up poor, in a house where windows were covered with newspaper, and breakfast was often nothing more than cornbread and water. But she had something no one could take from her: her mind, her hunger to learn, and her pride. She was a top student. What fascinated her most was history, especially the ones they called rebels: Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, women who dared to say no, even if it cost them their freedom, or their lives. Claudette absorbed every word. She memorized passages from the Constitution, challenged her teachers, not because she was disrespectful, but because she thought. She once said, "I knew my rights. I believed in them. But every day the world showed me those rights weren't meant for me." To most, she was just a quiet, bookish girl, soft-spoken, smart, polite. But inside her, something was building, something strong, something that, one day, wouldn't let her stand up. She didn't plan to be a symbol. She wasn't trying to start a revolution. She was just tired of being treated like she was less than human. Inside her boiled the silence of generations. And one day, it broke free. Part 4. The day she refused to stand. It was March 2nd, 1955. Just another day. A little warmer than usual. A soft breeze, school uniform, books in her bag, last class of the day, finished. And Claudette got on the bus. Montgomery, Alabama, a tired city. A city where skin color decided everything, even where you were allowed to sit. She took a seat in the so-called neutral zone, that part of the bus where black riders could sit, until a white person boarded. Then you stand. No argument, no protest, just quietly move to the back. But that day, Claudette didn't stand. A white man stepped onto the bus. The driver turned to Claudette and 3 other black girls. You know the rules. Get up. The others stood. She stayed seated. 15 years old, a girl. The bus driver, white. The men boarding, white. The city around her, against her. But she didn't flinch. Later, she would say, it felt like Harriet Tubman was pressing down on one shoulder and Sojourner Truth on the other. The driver shouted. People on the bus looked away. No one said a word. No one stood up for her. The police came. They grabbed her arms, dragged her off the bus. One of them hit her. The other mocked her. They arrested her, threw her into a jail cell, the kind used for grown men. No one in her family knew where she was. No one came. She was completely alone, but inside, there wasn't fear. There was fury. There was clarity. This is wrong, she thought. I'm not guilty. I did the right thing. She could have backed down. She could have followed the rules. She could have just stood up. But she didn't. She stayed. Part 5. Why was she forgotten? She did it first, 9 months before Rosa Parks. She sat. She didn't move. She was arrested. She sparked a wave. And then she disappeared. Almost no one knows her name. She's not in the textbooks. She's not in the movies. History passed her by. Why? After Claudette Colvin was arrested, her name began to circulate in civil rights circles. But very quickly, doubts came. She's too young. She's too defiant. She comes from the wrong kind of family. She won't sit well with white audiences. And then she became pregnant. Not married, just 15. For the leaders of the movement, that was too much, too risky, too complicated, too messy for a clean public campaign. So they chose someone else, older, respected, flawless, Rosa Parks, and Claudette faded into the background. She kept fighting. She testified in court. She became part of the case that changed the law. But her face stopped appearing in the news. No more headlines, no more speeches. She lived the rest of her life in silence, became a nurse, raised her children, and every time someone spoke the name Rosa Parks, Claudette would lower her eyes, not from jealousy, but because she knew. There was no justice in this story, not even in the way it was told. Part 6. Her case, her victory, but not her glory. After the arrest, she didn't disappear. Claudette Colvin didn't shut down. She didn't step aside. She kept speaking. When civil rights lawyers were preparing a lawsuit to challenge bus segregation, they needed people who had refused to give up their seats. They chose 4 women, 4 who had said no, and Claudette was one of them, the youngest, the first. The case was called Browder vs. Gale. It became the legal weapon that shattered segregation in public transportation. It wasn't a march. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a song. It was paperwork, attorneys, facts, judges, and truth. In court, Claudette told her story, about that day, about the police, about the fear, about what it felt like to be alone on that bus and still stay seated. And then came the silence. Months of waiting, of living as if nothing had happened, of going to work, walking past buses, while inside one thought pulsed over and over. I had to do it. And then, on June 5th, 1956, the court made its decision. Bus segregation was unconstitutional, illegal, unacceptable. It wasn't just a statement. It was a turning point. A few months later, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the ruling, and by December, buses in Montgomery no longer had signs dividing white and black riders. It was a victory, real, legal, undeniable. But in the newspapers, there were other names. On the news, other faces. And Claudette Colvin, she remained in the story, without a frame, without a title. Part 7. What did it feel like? To be forgotten. She was still just a girl who, one day, didn't stand up. Think back to a moment in your life when you did something that mattered, but no one noticed. Now imagine that what you did changed a law, changed a city, changed the country, and still, they never said your name. Claudette Colvin lived with that for decades. She didn't yell, she didn't demand credit, she didn't call newspapers or chase attention. But inside, there was always this quiet feeling. The world moved on, without me. She spoke about it plainly, not bitter, but with a certain sadness. History likes its heroes neat, she once said. And I wasn't neat. I was real. Too young, too outspoken, too real to be a symbol. And yet, it was her realness that changed the course of history. Claudette went on living an ordinary life. She became a nurse, raised her children, and every day she walked past buses where there were no longer signs dividing white from black. And she knew, without her, that wouldn't have happened. But the world stayed silent. The years passed, and sometimes silence is louder than applause. Part 8. Her legacy, and a truth that shouldn't be forgotten. Decades went by. Claudette Colvin's name was never on television. She was never invited to ceremonies, never mentioned in school books, until one day, someone finally asked, who was the first? They found her. They listened. Journalists, historians, filmmakers. She started to speak, cautiously, without anger, just telling the truth. She was finally recognized. She received awards. Books were written about her. Her name appeared once again in courtrooms, in museums, in public memory. But all of it came after she turned 70. Too late to change the past, but not too late to change how we remember it. Today, Claudette Colvin lives in New York, quietly, without headlines, without noise. But her voice has finally been heard. History doesn't always tell the truth. Sometimes it chooses what's convenient. Sometimes it stays silent. But we're here to give voice to those who were silenced, to bring back justice, even if half a century has passed, because truth doesn't lose its power, even if it's kept in the shadows for far too long. Claudette Colvin, the girl who refused to stand, because she knew she was a person, and she knew she had the right to sit. We've told her story. Now we pass it on to you, so you'll know, so you'll remember, so you can keep it alive. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe, support this channel, and together we'll make sure silence never wins again.